Explain like I'm 5. When our body temperature is high, why do we feel cold? I was recently sick and my body temperature was 38.6 Celsius. It felt like I was in a refrigerator. So why do we feel cold when we have a high body temperature? Shouldn't we feel hot instead? Your body always has a set point temp that it's trying to get to. When your current temp is above the current set point, you feel hot and get the urge to heat-shedding behaviors like removing clothes, having a cold drink, etc. When your current temp is below the current set point, you feel cold and get the urge to do heat-seeking behaviors like putting on clothes and blankets, having hot drinks, etc. When you're sick, your body raises the set point temperature. It's like turning up the thermostat setting. With the set point raised, your current temp will be below the set point. So guess what? You feel cold and start doing heat-seeking behavior to get even warmer. Your actual temperature doesn't matter. If it's below the current set point, you feel cold. With a fever, your body raises the set point on purpose to make you give yourself a fever. Great response. In addition to this, shivering isn't something that just happens because you are cold. It's actually a measure to raise your body temperature from the repeated, fast muscle contractions. Just like working out raises your body temperature. So this is kind of backwards. When you're sick, you don't feel cold because your body is hot. Your body gets hot because you feel cold. Your mind tricks your body into feeling cold so that it goes into overdrive, heating you up in an effort to kill off whatever is making you sick. Explain like I'm 5. How do animals without dangerous abilities continue to be animals with no natural predators? Like, I'm not going to question why nobody in the animal kingdom besides armed humans wants to mess with an elephant. And the same goes for maybe some notoriously poisonous species. But even a dodo allegedly had no predators and thus lacked survival instincts as a result. You mean to tell me nothing around it decided that's easy prey? The dodo existed only on a single small isolated island. There wasn't anything around it to decide that it was prey until humans brought animals with them to the island, at which point everything from rats to pigs decided they were prey and they went extinct. Fair enough. I guess a better example would be Australian rabbits, which while fast and skittish are in a notoriously dangerous wildlife environment that doesn't care about them apparently. All Google is giving me is about how humans failed to deal with them. Australian rabbits are European rabbits set loose very recently in an alien environment. In their native environment, there are absolutely predators. But in Australia, there isn't a predator evolved to catch their specific niche, tiny, very fast mammalian. And even then, they are still preyed on, mostly by goannas and a few snakes. However, the rabbits breed too quickly for them to keep the numbers down. Location, 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 as the famous saying goes. I live in Australia, and many of the native animals here, like koalas, cockatoos, kangaroos, and emus, have no notable natural predators. Put any of these animals onto the Great Savannah in Africa, and I dare say, many wouldn't last the night. Aside from location, size, and speed are other attributes that may explain the prevalence of a particular animal within an ecosystem. This becomes somewhat problematic, as you can imagine. Australia lost the Great Emu War, and kangaroos outnumber humans in Australia by a factor of 3. Explain like I'm 5. How was the first ancient animal to ever step out of the water able to survive breathing air instead of water? That's likely not how it happened. We have some fish today that can live out of water for a little while. This is super helpful when your tide pool evaporates. You're not dead when the next tide comes in, so evolution selects for this feature in this fish. Long ago, some fish that had a feature like this probably needed to move across land to an adjacent tide pool. This gave them more ways to survive. So the individuals that could survive on land the longest won. After a while, it became more efficient not to breathe in the water at all anymore. That makes the individuals that drop the breathe-in water feature the first land animals. One would think that the evolutionary advantage would be in breathing in both water and land. If you can get all your needs from just one of those, why waste the energy maintaining both sets of organs? Tell that to the turtles that can breathe underwater through their butts. Nothing like this happens in one step. Some fish that live entirely in water have evolved the ability to gulp air, which allows them to survive in poorly oxygenated waters. Fish living in shallow areas that dry up periodically or on tidal flats started to be able to stay out of water for longer periods of time to get from one body of water to another. Mutations that allowed some of them to stay out of the water for longer meant they'd survive better. Mutations that strengthened their fins for faster movement over land also helped them. Some of those forms of fish exist today: lungfish, mudskippers, and catfish that migrate between pools. Fossil examples of these transitional creatures, like Tiktaalik, show clear features that are between fish and amphibians. So there was no first ancient animal on land. There were many that hovered on the margin between the water and land, and gradually were able to stay on land more. Over time, some of them became able to stay out of water for very long times, eventually indefinitely. Amphibians like salamanders are still closely tied to water. Their skin needs to stay wet. They lay their eggs in water, mostly. Some have to mate in water. Some fish, such as bettas, can actually breathe a bit. They come to the surface and gulp some air into an organ called a labyrinth organ. From there, they can absorb oxygen. Also, amphibians can absorb some oxygen through their skin. Additionally, some species of fish walk on the ocean floor, and mudskippers walk on land as well. The line between aquatic and terrestrial is blurrier than people expect. Explain like I'm 5. Why tritium is radioactive while oxygen-18 is not. So the title, as far as I understood, tritium is radioactive because it has more neutrons than protons, and one neutron that's not being held by a proton is slowly decaying through beta decay. Oxygen-18 has 10 neutrons and 8 protons, but it's not radioactive at all. Why? It's not that the number of neutrons are higher than protons, it's that those specific number of neutrons can't easily be held together by those specific number of protons. Also, the heavier elements get the more neutrons they tend to have. Lead is the heaviest stable element, and it has 82 protons and 125 neutrons. Just to clarify for others who may not know, we classify an element as stable if the predominant isotopes are stable. Radioactive isotopes exist across the periodic table of the elements. Tritium is an obvious example, but I prefer potassium-40 since its presence in high potassium foods leads to low doses of radiation being described as equivalent to eating a number of bananas. Complete tangent. I also find it amusing that doctors tend to describe large doses of radiation as an equivalent number of days exposed to direct sunlight. People apparently don't realize how much radiation the sun puts out. Neutrons and protons do not bind one-to-one. Neutrons hold on to all nearby protons. Only if you have such an abundance of neutrons that they can't get enough neighboring protons do they cause radioactivity. The ideal neutron-to-proton ratio increases with larger isotopes, but starts around 1:1 and gets closer to 3:2 as you go up. And don't protons hold on to neutrons as well? The bonding is mutual. Nothing in this universe can pull on something without being pulled on back. If the neutrons stick to protons, then protons equally stick to neutrons. Explain like I'm 5. How do lactose-intolerant people survive as toddlers when you basically only drink milk for the first few months of your life? Most babies don't have lactose intolerance, even if they'll go on to develop it later in life. This is a genuine genetic condition in which an LCT gene mutation makes them unable to digest lactase, but it is rare. Instead, most people develop lactose intolerance later in childhood or even as adults. Ironically, these people's genes are functioning normally. The normal, original human condition would have been to lose lactose tolerance as we age, because we no longer needed it to process milk once we weren't babies. Instead, after we developed agriculture and began raising cattle, we developed another set of gene mutations that made adults lactose persistent or lactose tolerant, meaning we could keep on drinking milk for life. People who are lactose intolerant today usually lack this lactose persistency, rather than having a genuine deficiency in the LCT gene all the way back at the beginning. This mainly applies to Europeans and places like India. The majority of Africans and Asians, something like 90%, are lactose intolerant. This comment applies just as well in those regions. Infant lactose intolerance is extremely rare globally. What we refer to as lactose intolerance is actually loss of the ability to digest lactose after weaning. There are very few lactose-intolerant babies. It usually develops around 5 years old or later. For those babies that are lactose intolerant, there is formula without lactose. Historically, the baby may not thrive. Failure to thrive is just about the saddest euphemism. Human infants express lactase, which catalyzes lactose into sugars. In many populations, infants lose this ability as they are weaned. This is normal. Lactose intolerance is normal. It's people that aren't that are the freaks. Explain like I'm 5. Why do artificial strawberry flavors taste so much different than actual strawberries? Usually, artificial flavors do a good job at tasting like things that they aren't, except for artificial strawberry flavors. I like them, but they taste nothing like strawberries, even for an artificial flavor. Artificial flavors are 1 or 2 chemical compounds that are easily manufactured in a lab. This is a pretty good match for a lot of fruits. Artificial strawberry flavor is... Actual strawberries have a much more complicated chemical tasting profile. Additionally, strawberries are low sugar for a fruit, so any kind of strawberry candy is kind of doomed from the outset. Actual strawberries have many different chemical compounds that contribute to their smell and taste, and many more that don't significantly contribute, but may play some part in the overall flavor that you detect. Another component is mouthfeel, which is the physical sensations associated with a food but not directly related to taste. Mouthfeel can still affect taste, though. For example, many people don't like the taste of mushrooms, when in reality, they don't like the often rubbery texture. The negative mouthfeel tricks them into disliking the taste. Add blended mushrooms to a stew or gravy or soup, so the mouthfeel is different, and suddenly they like the taste. Not universally true, of course. Some people just don't like the taste either. Artificial fruit flavors use 2 or 3 of the most prominent chemical compounds that are associated with the natural flavor, along with a butt-ton of sugar for sweetness. It's nearly impossible to fully replicate the exact list of compounds in exactly the same ratios. That would be a lot of work, and if they cared that much, they'll just use actual strawberries. But even actual strawberry juice doesn't taste the same because of the change in mouthfeel, along with some changes made during processing. Side note for processing: most juices are extracted from the fruit and then deoxygenated and may be dehydrated concentrated. Any pulp is removed and stored separately, also deoxygenated and dehydrated. Both may or may not be frozen. All of this is done to preserve the juice so the fruit can be harvested in the peak season, processed, and then the juice can sit in a tank for 6 months to be sold off peak season. Brands also want more control over the flavor, so customers know what they're getting in each bottle, instead of every bottle being like a wine that depends on the harvest. To control the flavor, a lot of the flavor compounds are removed and then added back in at more specific ratios to give that brand's particular flavor. The result is much more consistent juice. And since all of the ingredients came from that fruit or other natural sources, it's still all natural, even though it's about as far from being natural as it could be. Which is fine. It's the same chemicals either way, although the sugar content might be higher, and you might not like the resulting flavor as much. Regardless, the point is that artificial flavors only use the most important flavors and ignore the rest, and they can't mimic the mouthfeel of the fruit. The result is a flavor that is recognizably strawberry, or blueberry, or grape, but lacks the complex flavors of the real fruit. Growing up, I always complained about grape-flavored stuff, of which I'm not a big fan, not tasting like actual grapes from the grocery store, which I love. A few months back, a guy from work brought in some wild Concord grapes that grow by his house. They were fat and soft and had seeds, and very much unlike the grapes I would buy myself. I bit into one, and it tasted exactly like artificial grape. I was absolutely floored. I've also read that artificial banana flavor is based on a breed of banana that went mostly extinct a couple decades ago, and that's why the same discrepancy exists with bananas. I always hated cherry-flavored stuff as a kid, so I assumed I wouldn't like cherries. I don't think I had a real cherry until I was like 30, and I loved it. Fake cherry is vile. There's so many different types of cherries, though. Some are better than others, lol. Well, that's another episode of Explain Like I'm 5 in the books. I really appreciate all of you who made it this far into the video. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, it would really help the channel out a lot if you gave the video a thumbs up, subscribe, or leave a comment down below. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.